So, good morning everybody and welcome to our virtual event, Building Better Relationships Between PRs and Journalists. My name is Rebecca Potts and I'm the Group Events Manager for Access Intelligence, which includes PR software Vuelio, Journalist Network ResponseSource and Audience Intelligence Pulsar. We've partnered with two fantastic organisations to bring you an expert panel followed by, hopefully, a lively discussion. The organisations we've teamed up with are Journo Resources and Freelancing for Journalists. Journo Resources is an invaluable hub of resources for journalists, jobs, advice and events, a must bookmark site for any journalist. So I'll send a link round, don't worry. Freelancing for Journalists started life as a practical guide for those entering the world of freelance and has now grown into a book, popular podcast, Facebook community and training offering. So again, get subscribing. Before I introduce our awesome panel, today's event is about interaction and discussion. Throughout the panel, there will be poll questions asked, and it would be great to get as many of you here answering as possible to see who's in our audience today. So I'm going to pop our first poll up. It's, are you a journalist or PR? So let's go live. So that poll should be on your screen any seconds now. So after the panel, we'll open the floor to questions. And if you'd like to ask your question in person, please click on the yellow raise hand option and I can bring you onto the virtual stage. But don't worry, it won't turn your camera on. I'll just unmute your mic. Alternatively, if you want to ask your question through the old-fashioned way of text, just use the Q&A function as normal. But now it's time to meet our panel. Jem, I'll start with you. Introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm first. No pressure. My name's Jem. I'm the founder and editor, director, I guess any hat that needs doing, of Journo Resources, which I set up 5 years ago now. It's our 5th birthday this month. So yeah, do take a look at some of the new things we're doing this month. And also on the side, I'm a freelance journalist where I focus on lifestyle, human rights, anything a little bit quirky that I can find. And yeah, it's a little bit of a mixture of all things for me, really. So hopefully I'll be able to give a bit of insight both from that kind of journalist perspective and from other sides.
Awesome, thanks Jem. Over to you, Faima.
Hi everyone, my name is Faima. I am currently working as the senior staff writer at Journo Resources, which I've been doing for the past few months. I'm also freelancing on the side, and before all of this, I was at Metro Online on the lifestyle desk where I was at, I think 3 years. So yeah, covering all the lifestyle bits, trending news and original features, with a particular interest in race, religion, culture, gender, and all that good stuff.
Awesome, thanks, Faima. And on to you, Lily.
Hello. This is a moment where I almost forgot to unmute myself. Hi everyone, I'm Lily and I am co-founder of Freelancing for Journalists, which is a educational resource basically covering anything to do with freelance journalism. We have a podcast, book, we do training and webinars, got a newsletter, there's probably other things I've forgotten. And I also work as a freelance journalist, so my beat is quite broad, but it's money, health and lifestyle. Most, particularly in the UK, is personal finance. The health and lifestyle stuff I do tends to be more for overseas publications. So that's me.
Awesome, lovely. And finally, last but by no means least, Emma.
Hello everyone, I am the other half of Freelancing for Journalists. So Lily's already done a great job of explaining what we do and I don't think you forgot anything on that list. The list is getting longer. But I'm also a freelance journalist. I have been for 15 years this year and I specialise in health and medicine. So I mainly write for specialist titles that for pharmacists, GPs, nurses, anyone kind of working in healthcare. So that's me.
Thanks, Emma. Amazing. So let's have a little look at our first poll and see what split is. So we've got 90% of you are PRs. So I think there's going to be frantic scribbling of notes down, but don't worry, we're recording this whole event, so you'll get it afterwards. But we have still got a kind of a healthy 10% of people who are journalists. So if you feel like you want to add anything to our panel, and kind of pop it in the comments in the chat or ask a question as well. So moving on. Before we go to our panel with our first question, I want to hear from you how the pandemic has affected your relationship with PRs or journos. So I'm going to launch the second poll now. So the question is, has the pandemic made it more difficult or easier to get in touch with PRs or journalists than it did before? So let's launch that. That should be on everybody's screens now. So March 2020 turned everything upside down. We had to quickly change how we were used to working. What did you find most challenging at first, and what workarounds did you find? I'm going to go to Emma first for this.
Okay, so I was thinking about this. There was quite a lot of my working setup that didn't change because I've worked from home for forever. As a freelance journalist, I'm based in Sheffield. A lot of the people that I work for are based in London. So I've been doing things remotely for a long time on the journalism side of things. I mean, admittedly, I wasn't trying to homeschool children at the same time before. That was a bit of a nightmare. As a health journalist, I've covered pandemics before. I covered swine flu, but I think this was so different to anything that anybody had experienced before. Keeping on top of the sheer volume of information I needed to be on top of, to do news shifts, to do features, because it was just changing so rapidly. That was really overwhelming. And I was spending like all my waking hours learning about, finding about, getting the kind of most up-to-date information on coronavirus and being kind of bombarded from all sides. One of the things that did change was, so I have to contact a lot of press office media teams at organisations, at NHS organisations, at various kind of think tanks and health related organisations. They all suddenly started working from home, and the systems that they had for dealing with your queries didn't necessarily shift straight away. So struggling to get hold of people, not having a mobile, but the office number not being diverted yet, or not knowing if someone's seen your email, or so that bit was quite stressful. But I was thinking about these examples. I have made 3 very, very good connections with PRs over this period who approached me for specific things that I needed, who are now kind of in my regular, we help each other out all the time. So I think, it's not all been negative. I think everyone's been kind of a bit more open to kind of collaboration and finding new ways of doing things. So that would be my answer to that one.
Awesome. Has anybody else had any differing experiences?
So I'm happy to jump in on a kind of a bit more practical level, I guess, about things that have kind of changed. So similarly to Emma, I have always worked from home. The biggest change for me actually is I have a very small home office, and now I've got to share it with someone, which is an absolute pain. Never planned to have another desk within like an arm's reach. But in terms of actual practical stuff, I have always been working from home, so kind of had quite a good system of communication set up. And I think one of the biggest changes I noticed is when we suddenly had a whole raft of people working from home who weren't necessarily used to it. Obviously we're on a video call now and it has calmed down, but the amount of requests for kind of calls and catch-ups that I was getting from clients kind of went through the roof, because a lot of people who were working, in staff suddenly thought, how do we keep in touch? How do we do this? And so I was finding that I was fielding off calls all the time for catch-ups when we normally wouldn't have had them. So I think, that had been one of the biggest things that I noticed, that there was very much a good month or two where it was very much call central. And I think it has been good to see that people have now kind of settled into working from home, or that kind of hybrid model a little bit more. And actually, I think bosses just trusting their staff a little bit more, and you don't need to be present on a phone call all the time. So a bit more of a practical one there, but that was definitely something I noticed as a trend, which has thankfully calmed down a bit.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll just add to that I've noticed that as well, in that rather than if you set up an interview with someone through a PR, quite often now they're saying, do you want to do a Zoom or a Teams call rather than a phone call? I think everyone is different, but I'm a big no, I just want to talk to someone on the phone. I think Zoom is great for this kind of thing, But I much prefer just doing it the way I've always done it, which is on the phone, so I can take notes. Because if I'm doing it on Zoom, I'm not going to have the eye contact because I'm going to be taking notes. So actually, it's easier for me to do it on the phone. So I think there has been this kind of shift that, we've got to do everything, through a video call. But actually, we don't. There's some things it's really great for, and other things, let's just carry on doing it the way we were before. So that's kind of one just small change that I've seen, but to be honest, everything else has been pretty much the same for me.
Faima, have you had any differing experiences? Obviously, because I think we still at Metro when the dreaded pandemic hit.
Yeah, I was still at Metro when I started working from home, and I feel like it became harder because usually I was in the habit of just Google, if I needed a PR, just check my email or just Google the client, the brand name, and then find a number and call them. And obviously everyone was in office, and someone would pick up. But then when I started working from home, and everybody else did too, it was just like harder to get through to people. And I'm also someone that used to meet up with PRs like every once in a while, and because I prefer that face-to-face interaction. And I actually ended up being quite good friends with a few PRs I'd met while I was at Metro. So since the pandemic, obviously we've not been able to meet up anymore. And like Lily said, I'm not one for like those Zoom calls and like team meetups and stuff. So I feel like I've had less contact with PRs since I've been working from home. But some of them have been really good. I collectively put like their mobile number on like the website, whatever. So it's been quite easy to ring them up as I would have done before. But yeah, I don't think I've had much contact with PRs in the past year that I would have normally.
Yeah, it's interesting how kind of like the difference there between kind of like the freelance and the staff already is kind of like showing. So I'm going to have a little look at the poll and see. So we've got 71% of people saying they found it harder because our audience is more kind of weighted in the PR favour. I wonder if that's because we were obviously kind of like used to office working, whereas journalists kind of were used to, like you said, it didn't really impact you apart from kind of the more kind of annoyances of like there's more people around me than normal, which I wasn't expecting. So let's move on to the next question. Unsurprisingly, a lot of people had to adapt how they worked, but do you think any of the new ways of working are going to stick around as we head back into normal life, and who knows when that's going to be? If so, which ones do you think are going to stay and why? Jem, I'm going to go to you first.
Maybe this is a bit of a maybe this is a little bit of skirting the question by not picking a particular thing, but talking about more what I'm hoping for, if that makes sense. Because I think when we talk around new ways of working and, is it better for people to be in the office? Is it better for people to be at home? I think generally when I've kind of seen this discussion happening, there's definitely been a polarization to a certain extent of, I know certainly within the journalist community, and I'm sure you'll probably have found this echoed as PRs as well, it's very much been several camps of we need everyone in the office, or people going, I am never coming back. And I think the thing that I'm hoping for, and I think there is this nuance in the question actually, is that we can actually all just be a little bit more flexible. I think we've all found that certain things have worked, certain things haven't worked. And I think what I would really like to come from this is just a little bit more flexibility in terms of, from a journalist PR perspective, perhaps it is being able to offer that interview or that contact in a couple of different ways, and knowing that there's not a one size kind of fits all box. For journalists, it's not, I think, that we should all be in the office 5 days a week or that we should all be at home 5 days a week. So I think more generally, what I am hoping for is a little bit more nuance across everything, and a little bit more flexibility across both parts in how we're able to help each other and how we're able to kind of actually deliver. I appreciate that's not necessarily picking one thing, but I think it's potentially just having that nuance and flexibility across everything. So when someone does go to you, do you want this and let's do it this way, it'd be good to have a bit more flexibility in whatever that opportunity is, if that makes sense. I'm going to throw it to someone. That seems fun. Emma, you've unmuted. Do you want to go next?
Yes, yeah. Well, I did. My answer was a bit similar to yours, but specific on kind of Zoom Teams. I think as someone who's based far away in Sheffield from where most of the publications that I write for or organisations that might be trying to kind of get in touch with me, I used to get lots of, oh, let's meet up for a coffee, assuming I was in London. Or, can you, come down for this award do, whatever it might be. I've been able to do things, connect with people that I hadn't before because everybody's doing the Zoom thing. And that's been really good for me. I'm kind of taking part. I'm on a committee that I would never have been able to be on before because everybody just assumed you had to be in London. So when I choose that that is something I want to do, that's good. I think I am a bit fed up of everybody wanting a Teams interview. I hate Teams anyway. I can't stand it. It doesn't work. Everyone in the NHS use it, drives me to distraction. The number of interviewees now who are like, oh, should we do a Teams? No, can I please just pick up the phone and call you? But in certain circumstances, it has kind of really opened access for me to people to have those conversations. So I hope a bit of that hybrid model stays as well. The other thing is, as a health journalist, I hope that all the data that we're getting daily, constantly about everything stays, because access to data and information and open access to everything to do with the pandemic has been so great. I would like that spread to all other areas of healthcare. That would be fantastic. I'm going to ask Lily next.
It's hard as we go on with this one. Yeah, I mean, I think you've pretty much covered it all. I mean, I think there will be more of these, I think, kind of virtual events like this. I hope there will be. I hope it won't be so London centric. I'm not in London. I never have been. So it would be nice to see a more of a blended approach, I suppose, of kind of in-person events, virtual events, opportunities to meet people in person and virtually, but perhaps not like all the time. It would just take a while to settle down, I think. And I think there'll be a mixture of people working from home and people in the office. And like Jem says, it's all kind of about a flexibility really, and people perhaps getting a slightly better work-life balance, hopefully.
Faima, have you got anything to add?
I feel like we've pretty much covered all the points, but yeah, I agree. Like, I really hope that flexible working patterns stick around. I think all of our social and professional working batteries are really low at the moment. I think it's really difficult to just expect employees to be back in the office 45 hours a week. So I'm hoping that we get a choice over whether you want to work from home some days and be in the office other days. Because the way it's working at Metro at the moment is you work in the office once, I think it's 1 week in office, 3 weeks at home, which I think is fine, but at the same time it just means that you're pretty much not going to see your colleagues most of the time, because when you're in the office, they're not. So I hope we get, employees get a choice over which days they would prefer to be at home and which days they prefer to be in office. I think that kind of having a balance of both will increase employee satisfaction, because I just don't think people want to be in the office all the time anymore. Having that time from like not commuting and saving on saving money on whether it's lunch or commute or whatever. I think we've just gotten so used to it, and it'd be really difficult just to be expected to just go back into the way that it used to be.
Awesome. I'm just going to go to the chat because we've had some great comments. There's a lot of people agreeing with you, Emma, that Teams is the worst, Teams is horrendous. So let's hope we don't have anybody from Microsoft on here, or maybe they could take it as feedback, who knows. So we've got some comments. I've got some questions, but I'll save them for later. But Stephanie said, working from home has been fine for me, but it's been harder to get hold of journalists as offices often wouldn't give out mobile numbers. So we could only email and weren't able to chat for ideas. I'm also sure that's kind of the frustration that Faima was feeling the other way around as well. So it's all about kind of how we adapt as well to how we kind of, I guess, have an email signature, making sure that we've got not only an office number, but also a mobile number. Teams is worse, Teams is horrendous. I'm also based in Manchester with the majority of my clients' contacts in London. So the flexibility of Zoom Teams has been great for the same reasons, Emma, although definitely appreciate the value of the old school phone call, which again, I've heard that you all say kind of how much you appreciate kind of somebody just picking up the phone and kind of doing it the old fashioned way. Let's have a little look. Anything else? And obviously, again, people could not go anywhere, so it was easier to connect. It was better to get a focused meeting. Now I think people have got a form of any virtual meeting fatigue as well, so we will need to go to a hybrid solution in some way. But again, I think that will probably come out of the balance of kind of meeting face-to-face, phone calls, and then maybe sometimes the odd video call, but maybe less so. Right, let's move on to the next question, but it's good to see kind of a balance rather than just kind of negative out of the past 15 months. So we've got a mix of freelancers and obviously ex-staff journalists on the panel, and I'm sure we've got a mix in the audience as well, which brings us on to our next poll, and this one is just for PRs. So let me launch that now, which is, do you work with freelancers, staff writers, or a mixture of both? Just so we can kind of get some tips that are specific to them. So do or should PRs interact differently with freelance journalists compared to staff? What are your top tips for getting this right? And I'm going to go to one of our freelancing experts here. Lily, let's go to you first.
Yeah, definitely. It really is a different relationship that you'll have with freelance journalists. I think my top tip really is that for a freelance, exclusivity is key, basically. We don't want the press release that you've sent out to every single news desk, because every single news desk has got it, so there's nothing there that we can actually pitch. It might be slightly different if we're working a news shift, so sometimes I do news shifts, so then although it's on a freelance basis, I'm working for a publication and I might be turning around news stories, so then those press releases might be helpful. But more generally, what I want is something that nobody else has. So that might be exclusive case study that hasn't been offered out somewhere else, or it might be working with me to do maybe an exclusive report from some data that you've been able to gather. So actually, I don't want a barrage of press releases, and I don't want people phoning me up. I don't answer my phone as a rule, because generally it's someone ringing me up to tell me they've just sent me a press release, or they want to send me a press release, which I then delete. That is not useful for me as a freelance. It is more difficult, and it is a bit more, I suppose, about building a very unique relationship with an individual. But yeah, it's basically offering that person something that no one else has got, would be kind of my piece of advice. But also understanding that as freelancers, what we do changes quite a lot. So one day we might be doing news shift, the next day we might be doing features, and you kind of have to keep on top of what that freelancer is doing, if it's possible. So it's more of a, in some ways, it's more of a kind of intimate relationship perhaps that you might have with a freelancer, and really understanding their beat, because they will operate differently to a staffer. And I know Emma's given some, examples of freelancers that PRs she's worked with that have been really helpful, because they've really understood kind of what it is that she's after. So maybe I'll pass the baton on to you, Emma.
Yeah, so I mean, that basically you've just taken my answer, Lily, there. But yeah, I mean, the relationships I have that work well with PRs will be that they come to me with something specific, something that they've not put out a general press release to the nationals, and actually they want my advice a bit as well. So it's a bit more of a, like, I've got this information, where do you think that might fit? Is this something you might want to pitch? This is what we can offer you. And it's a bit more of a kind of relationship, kind of a back and forth between us. Those PRs will also note when I tweet about a feature or something I'm doing on, and then come back to me if they think they've got any case studies that will work for that. That works really well. But also just understanding that commissioning process, like the number of people that say, can you write something on this? Or, I see you work for this publication, can you do something on it? Well, it doesn't work like that. Like, you have to understand this commissioning process. And if I'm interested in the story and I think it's good, I will pitch it several places potentially, but I don't have the power to just publish that information. So just kind of understanding that freelancer's beat, the stuff that they're interested in, the stuff they publish, but also understanding, how how that commissioning process works, that actually we don't have a lot of control over any of, you know, what gets picked up. So yeah, just bearing that in mind, I think. Jem's looking at me very intently.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Jem's ready to get involved.
Or she's got
sorry. I didn't mean to. I was just agreeing with you. Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree what you said about exclusives. Like, it's no use to me if I've been sent you know, the same thing that everyone else has seen. I absolutely agree on the phone thing, and I think to put that kind of in context, I think there's a big difference between ringing a newsroom where there are lots of people there who whoever's free will pick up the phone. Actually, I think realizing that it's just me and that's really disruptive to my day and whatever I'm doing, to actually have it. I know it's only a 5-minute phone call, but if I'm in the middle of a story or I'm in the middle of doing something, it is actually quite disruptive. So I'm very guarded with my mobile number, and I don't put it in email signatures at all, because 90% of the time it actually isn't a story that's relevant to me either, because it's just reminding me about a press release. So I think it definitely is about kind of a personalized approach in an email, and yeah, having that conversation. I think 2 other things I guess I would add on is a bit kind of an extension of what you were saying, Emma, about understanding that process and how it works, is also understanding that we don't necessarily, you know, have all of the control about things like when it gets published, or, you know, we can't just nip in and make an edit. Very often I'm not, if I'm on a news shift, absolutely I'm the person typing it into the CMS, but as a freelancer I'm just sending off the Word doc and someone else is doing that, and as much as I do try as much as I can to let a PR know when stuff goes live, but sometimes, you know, that is just me spotting it when it goes live, the same as you guys. So, you know, a little bit of kind of empathy that we are trying our best to let you know when stuff will be used, but we can't necessarily do that because it's kind of outside of our control. And then the final thing, I guess, was just maybe it's a little bit of a tangent, but also kind of being as willing to work with a freelancer on the smaller publications and wins that they get, as well as the big ones. I find it quite frustrating a lot of the time when you kind of get something that looks great, and then someone kind of doesn't want to give this one to you because you're not necessarily working for a national, but actually for a freelancer there are kind of peaks and troughs, and some of the best relationships I've had with PRs over the last year have been ones that have, you know, been, you know, happy to reply to my request for something smaller, and then then they're the first person I go to when I've got something. So I had something, to give an example, there was something earlier in the year, I needed it for a small human rights publication. I really struggled to kind of get someone, but then that PR that helped me out, they were the first person I went to when I did have some stuff for the big issue and some bigger outlets. So I think also understanding that it is that kind of personal relationship, and sometimes it might be something smaller, but that the value in that is that you will be the first person I go to when I've got something bigger, if that makes sense. Faima, I'll send to you. I'll try and look less intense.
Yeah, and just want to echo everything that Tom said. I mean, I feel like as a freelancer, I keep getting those generic press releases and like promotional, like product launches and stuff like that, and I always reply the same thing, like, no publication in the world is going to pay me to pick this story up when they've got in-house staff that can do it themselves, if it's of interest, that is. But having said that, though, I do tell PRs that I'm very interested in, you know, unique and interesting case studies. That even if you're offering those case studies to, you know, in-house staff, I might be able to do an interview with that person, and they might give me a line that I could do like a whole interview profile on. And the same with research. I always encourage people, if they've commissioned research, to get in touch with me, because, you know, like I say, if they are emailing everyone that bit of research, I might be able to pull out a line from it that's really interesting, and that gives me an idea for a feature and so on. And that did actually happen to me one time. The PR did research into Muslim women's relationships with fitness in the pandemic, and those are areas that I'm interested in. I've written about Muslim women plenty of times, and that kind of research was right up my street, and I was able to read the whole thing, pick out some, you know, really strong lines, and we managed to place that piece in Stylist. So that was, you know, the PR had obviously they knew their audience, they knew that I'd be interested in something like that, and we were able to work. You know, I just got them on the phone. They told me a bit more about the research, and it became like this, you know, exclusive piece that we just kind of offered to stylists, and you know, so yeah, if it's research that is relevant to the journalist, then absolutely go for it. But if it's something really generic and like not that interesting, I wouldn't bother, contacting a freelance. It's very unlikely that they'll be paid to pick it up.
Awesome. There have been some absolutely top tips there, and I bet like all the PRs will be like, oh God, I've got so much insight. So just looking at the poll, the question was, do you work freelancers, staff writers, or a mixture of both? It's only a tiny percentage that work just with freelancers. The majority of people work with a mixture of both, and only 14% working with staff writers, which, I don't find that too surprising. I was expecting almost a washout of a mixture of both. Does that feel about right to everybody? Kind of that's kind of like the right kind of mix. Okay, so it kind of moves on from what people were talking about and about doing research, which is really interesting as well. So you will cover a huge range of topics. When it comes to niche areas of expertise, is there anything PRs can do to help get the right journalist contacts and really target their outreach? So are there any communities, virtual or in person, you can recommend for your own areas of expertise? So Faima, you've kind of touched on this already about research, but I'm going to go to you first.
Yeah, I really like working with organizations, charities and PRs who really have a good idea of what I'm after. And usually, sometimes, I end up using, contacting the same people because I know that they will get what I'm looking for. For example, one organization that comes to mind is On Road Media, which is a charity that I've been working with at Journo Resources as well. What they do is they connect journalists to case studies, relevant case studies, because they want better representation of marginalized communities. So if I'm writing on poverty, for example, or if I'm reporting on trans people, they'll make sure that I'm being put in touch with the most relevant people, like the people that I'm writing about. So I appreciate someone who can actually, put me in contact with someone that I might not myself have been able to find. And it also ensures that you're not covering an issue without actually centering the people that it's about, because I think that can be, quite dangerous to those communities. Other charities that I've had a good relationship with, Macmillan, they're really good at reading my content. I think that's really important, because one story that comes to mind last year, because I've written about Muslims quite a lot, and they just reached out to me being like, hey, we've got this this Muslim man who's got cancer, but he's still fasting because it's during Ramadan. So that became like this interesting case study of a person who's willing to talk to me, which is another thing. Sometimes you find a really strong case study, but they can't talk to you. Whereas if it's coming from, if a PR is presenting a case study to you, that means that they're willing to talk. So that was quite like a niche, interesting case study that was relevant to my areas of interest. So yeah, I think my advice would really be that read the journalist content. Don't just contact stores and try to just relate your client to what. Because I think it shows if you're kind of reaching a little bit and you're like, oh yeah, this might be of interest to you because you were about that one thing that one time, and then you were just like, oh, did I? It feels a bit. But yeah, anyways, another area that another thing that I use is Facebook groups. Facebook are so good because there's like a Facebook group for everything. Like whatever I need, there's a Facebook group for that. The good way is to also see what's going on in the things that you're interested in, whether it's like, I don't know, DIY, budgeting, family, drama and stuff. If you scroll through Facebook groups, you usually find quite interesting story ideas and case studies. I don't think I've answered your question. Sorry, I kind of just went on a bit of a tangent, but I hope that was helpful.
Does anybody else have any kind of insights as to where people can get that niche information?
I think I can understand from the other side of it is very difficult, and in a way it's kind of what we'd say to people when they start out freelancing in terms of researching the publication. Well, I think you need to research the byline. So if there's particular publications you want to get into, then if you look at the bylines and then look up the people, you should be able, with a Google search, be able to work out whether they're staff or freelance. There aren't really, I say there aren't lists. I mean, I am obviously on loads of lists because I get a load of PR emails that I never asked to get. So where those lists are, I don't know. But yeah, you have to do your homework to kind of find freelancers, really. I would say a good way of kind of gauging if people are freelance and what sort of stuff they're working on is keeping an eye on things like the Journo request hashtag on Twitter, because a lot of freelancers use that. I know staff do as well, but I suspect it's maybe slightly more freelancers that use it. And it's, you know, just build up a kind of, I guess, a database of freelancers through that. And yeah, there are communities that have a mixture of journalists and PRs. So like on Facebook, there's the #1 media women group, which is a real mix of PRs and journalists. So that can be a good place to kind of find freelancers as well. I would say there's kind of one thing that I would really like to emphasize from kind of my point of view in terms of how you can work with a freelance journalist or build that relationship with them. It's not actually about you coming to me. What it is, it's you responding to me, and that's where I build relationships. So if I put a request out on Twitter or on Response Source, that's where I'm looking, you know, for a specific expert or a case study. If I then get PRs come back to me with a relevant person, not some tangential thing, but a relevant person, they've read the criteria I'm looking for, that is when I'm much more likely to work with you and your client and start that relationship. And I will come back to you next time because I think, oh, they got a really good spokesperson for me. They were really helpful, or they gave me some really useful data. And that's where the relationship will start for me. It is not going to start from you emailing me. It's just not going to happen, if I'm completely honest. What I'm looking for is PRs that are really reliable and look at the information that I am putting out and respond to that, rather than kind of cold calling me, I suppose. And I think it's kind of a bit similar with editors as well, that cold pitching to editors can be very difficult, but if they're looking for something specific and we respond to it as freelancers, we're much more likely to get a commission and to start building a relationship with them. So I think it's almost turning it on its head and thinking, how can I be useful to a journalist, rather than how can I push my content and get a journalist to pick it up. That's me personally. That's kind of the way that I operate.
I think it's a nice spin there of kind of just like kind of looking at how responding rather than pushing. Jem or Emma? Emma's unmuted. I'll go to you.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, once again, we spend far too much time together. Lily just said what I was going to say. But I would add to that every good relationship that I have with a PR, where I would go back to them, they would come to me and I would pay more attention to what they were telling me, started with them responding to something I put out on Twitter. They found a case study, or they know of some work happening or some new technology that's been developed that might fit in with a feature that I'm working on. I do put it all out on social media. You know, I have a website, everything that I'm doing is up to date. It's really easy to find out who I work for and what kind of articles I do. So if you've taken that 5 minutes, do that bit of research and give me the thing I want, that's then the start. If then you say, oh, I've got some other stuff, but I'd really like to, find out what works best for you. Can we have a quick Zoom coffee or whatever it is? I'm then far more likely to do that once we've already started that process and I know that, they've helped me out. It's just like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of thing. It's, rather than, just like a cold approach. Jem, have you got anything?
I think the only thing I would add, I definitely would agree with everything everyone said, and was going to mention the Facebook groups as well, because there are a couple of nice Facebook groups which have both journalists and PRs. The only thing I was going to add is that in terms of social media, I think it is potentially also in some cases a bit more useful than just looking at bylines. If someone's on staff or if they're doing shifts, you will end up having to write a lot of stories in a day. Like I know at Metro, for example, you'll be expected to write, potentially 8 or more stories a day. So not all of these stories are in the area that you're kind of specifically interested in, whereas if you go to someone's Twitter account, the chances are the things that they're going to be sharing are the stories that they're actually interested in the areas that they kind of would pitch and would want to spend kind of a bit more time on. So I think maybe that's a useful thing to think about in terms of nuance. Like you might have noticed that someone's written a byline about something, but is that actually the area that they're interested in? And you can actually get like a better gauge from that by what articles they're actually promoting. Because when I've been on shift at the iPaper, I have to write whatever news comes in that day. I don't really get a lot of say in that. So I'm not necessarily going to follow up on some of that stuff, but you'll be able to see very quickly, I think, from the pieces that I do share, which are the areas that I might kind of pitch or would want to follow up on. Faima, did you unmute yourself? Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that if you are trying to build a good relationship with journalists and if you're trying to respect their boundaries as well, just ask what hours they work, because not every journalist will work Monday to Friday or 9 to 5. When I was at Metro, I used to work Sunday to Thursday, and I'd get calls on a Friday, which would be my day off, and that would really annoy me. I'm not working, and I don't like to be contacted on my weekends. And then what I ended up doing was, when I, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, I started doing a lot more sort of like Zoom chats like that, and I would just tell them that, listen, I work from Sunday to Thursday, so if you really want to contact me, can you reach me within these hours? And you're more likely to get a response out of me on a Sunday, because Sundays are quieter and I don't have that many emails. I'd have like 200 emails to check, whatever. So if you really want me to look at your stuff, email me on a Sunday. And that was something that worked for me, because people actually did listen. So yeah, like, because even now I get emails at like 9:30 p.m. and I'm just not going to read that, because that's not my working hours. No one should be working at 9:30 unless you're doing a night shift or something. But yeah, so just ask what days they work. If they tell you, then listen to that. Try not to contact them outside of those hours, because that's going to annoy them. And just ask is my advice.
Awesome, thank you. We've had a couple of requests for the Facebook group names in the chat, so I'll make sure I get them off you so that we can share in the recording email afterwards. I think whoever's going to be adminning those is going to have quite a few join requests over the next few days, I would imagine. So I'm very conscious that we've only got 15 minutes left, and we've also got quite a lot of questions coming in the chat and the Q&A. So what I want to do is I'm going to go to our final question to the panel, and then I'll come to the questions from the audience. So as journalists, and I'm sure everybody in our wonderful, wonderful audience as well, I'm sure you all use the Journalist Inquiry Service in your job, which Lily mentioned. So what advice would you give to PRs when they're responding to your requests? Jem, let's start with you.
I guess the simplest thing, and I think we've touched on this a couple of times already, is just actually responding to what has been sent out exactly, if that makes sense. So not using it as an opportunity to jump off into something else. So if I've asked for an expert in this, only reply if you've got that. And I know that sounds super simple, but I do sometimes, get emails being like, oh, I don't quite have this, but I have this. And that's not necessarily useful for me at the time. And also just being, I think, quick and timely and jumping on it if you can. Appreciate that you're obviously all busy people, so you might not see it. But often I use it the most when I'm kind of under a deadline and I need someone. So yeah, if you can reply as quickly as you can, and also just make sure you do have what I'm looking for and it's not kind of that tangential jump. I think those are the two key, if simple, things for me.
Anybody else want to either echo or add on?
Yeah, I mean, I would say exactly the same thing. Please do not email about something tangential, because it's just going to really not go down well. And the thing is, when we put stuff out in response forms, we could, I can get 50 to 100 responses, and if half of them are irrelevant, that's just a waste of my time. But like Jem says, it is about being quick normally, but quick and relevant is kind of the key to that, really.
And I think also, sorry to jump back in, I think also just, again, it's really difficult if you're being quick and you want to make sure, it's difficult to know that you've definitely got what you're offering. But I mean, just having that 90% certainty if you are offering that interview, it will definitely kind of come off. And obviously I do appreciate that is really quite tricky sometimes if you're managing lots of stuff, but just being, 90% certain that what you're offering is going to come off, because what's even more frustrating is when I go, yeah, this is great, let's do it. And then you're like, oh, actually, this person I've asked and said no, and that's kind of wasted both of our time. And I appreciate that happens sometimes, but just being fairly confident what you're offering is kind of a strong possibility.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be my point, Jen, because I think from when you're putting out, requests for a case study as well, just, having some idea that that person then is around and willing to speak for the publication that you're working for. Because I sometimes get that with just press releases. Oh, this is interesting. I'm doing a news shift that day. Call up the PR. Can I organise an interview? Oh, I don't know if they're around this week. Or why did you put out the press release then? Just making sure that you can actually follow through on that thing just saves everybody a lot of time and hassle, you as well. So,
and it's understanding if people want a case study or an expert, because I find not so much from Response Source, but on Journo request on Twitter, the hashtag Journo request, I now have to be very explicit. Sorry if I come across as grumpy, but I have to be very explicit, and I will say I'm looking for a case study of X, and then I will say I am looking for an individual, no PRs please, only because in the past so many PRs have contacted me with a client who can talk about their company, and that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for kind of, your average person on the street that has this particular issue, not a company that is trying to solve that issue, for example. And actually, if I wanted that, I would have asked for that. And you might think, oh, well, they'll probably be looking for experts as well. Well, chances are I've already got that bit sorted. So again, it's just very frustrating when you're getting a lot of responses that are not about what you're asking for. And it to be honest, it smacks a bit of desperation that people are just, latching onto anything to try and that's not how you build a relationship. At the end of the day, you build a relationship by giving someone what they want. So it's better not to respond if you haven't got anything relevant than to respond with something that's not relevant.
Can I just add as well to something that Emma said? Yeah, I think it's so important to make sure that especially if you're presenting a case study, please make sure that they're available. Like last week, I've been trying to reach this person, and the agent kept telling me they were busy. And then I got a press release being like, oh, we've got interview time with the same person. I was like, oh my God, amazing. It's literally what I'm looking for. And I emailed him back, like, okay, cool, when is she available? And then he was like, oh, sorry, actually, she's not available. I was just like, what was the point of that? Yeah, so please make sure they're free. And another thing is, be transparent. If you pitch this one thing to multiple people at the same publication and one of them has replied, because I don't know who my colleagues are speaking to, but a few times it's been the case where they're talking to the same PR that I am, and then we end up doubling up, and the PR hasn't said, oh, by the way, I'm talking to your colleague Natalie or whatever. And one time we actually ended up publishing the same story because they were different days, and we hadn't realised that the other piece had gone up, and then we ended up with two of the same stories, which obviously looks bad on us as a publication because we didn't communicate, but we just assumed that the person had just been talking to us exclusively. So yeah, just be transparent. If you are talking to someone within the same publication, just be like, oh, by the way, I'm chatting to so-and-so, and that way we can have a chat between us on who should carry on with the story. So yeah.
I think as well that it works the other way, is being transparent with the case study about what is expected of them as well. Because I've found that someone's been put forward and then I've interviewed them and they've not wanted to be identified, or they've not wanted to provide a photo, or there's certain questions they won't answer, and it's because they haven't been briefed properly. And again, that's really frustrating. If I've pitched something off the back of that and then it's fallen through, that's basically time that I've spent that I'm not going to get paid for, and I'm not going to go back to that PR again. And I've actually, there was a series I used to write for that was heavily case study based, and in the end I had to make a rule to myself that I wasn't going to use PRs to find case studies, because I was let down time and time again by them not briefing the case study properly. And I lost several commissions because of it. So again, it's it's making sure that case studies know exactly what it is that they're signing up for. And if you need more information from us, then just ask for it. And I understand everyone's really busy and case studies, can be hard to get hold of. But if it's going to work, then, you need to have the kind of groundwork there, and everyone needs to be fully on board, right, before you get to the point where you're interviewing them.
Awesome. I think I'm going to go to questions now from the audience. So if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask kind of verbally over their mic, please raise your hand and I should be able to pop into you. So we've already got one. Fantastic. So I'm going to try and do a mix of those. We've also got a shed load in the Q&A as well. And with the amount of time left, we're never going to get through them all, which I think is a very good sign. So I'm going to go to Gerard, who has got his hand up. I'm going to click allow to talk and you should be able to unmute. Hi, Gerard.
Oh, thank you so much, Rebecca. I really appreciate you giving me the time. Apologies, I wrote you a big, long question there, but I thought it'd be good to get an understanding of my... Again, you can sense the frustrations from all of the panel, but just a bit of a frustration around our problem with relaying to journalism, especially during the COVID crisis, because we've been working now since 2017 and looking at the indoor air quality and basically the removal of viruses and bacteria. We then got informed by the CDC and EPA that our product was in fact one of only 40 that kills COVID. Now, the reason for the frustration is we've been following up with the government. We're now working with the government on a massive tender. We've been working with the NHS and care sector. But our frustration is basically that when we approach journalism with regards our products and solutions, they are looking at it as if they can't do anything with it because it looks like a promotional piece. Now, my frustration around that is for the past year, we've watched hazardous chemical companies do deep cleans, been on the news, the focus on the press, and yet our solution, again, is a very natural solution. It's non-toxic. So it's trying to pick up on a journalist or someone who will do an investigative piece, considering that we've spoke to the government last March and they've done nothing about it. Now, this is also an investigative piece and an information piece, but also, for me, it's a turnaround of, especially working within the care sector, is giving people hope. And the trouble is with all the bad news. And just to see, again, is there a way around that and the best way to approach it? Because, again, we've got a good news story here that can basically help people. However, we keep hitting barriers. So just to get some ideas and hopefully some good insights on why this is happening and a good route to go down.
Awesome, thank you. Does anybody want to jump in and take that? Emma, there we go.
I mean,
that was up your street.
Yeah, I completely understand your frustration. This has happened to me recently with another story that a PR came to me with a company that have got a product that is actually being used by the NHS, but the NHS won't promote it because that seemed like promoting a product. They can't, they've got research studies and lots of things, but it's kind of not getting the promotion that they need. And it was something that I was thinking about how you could do a piece on this. I mean, I think how I personally tend to use this kind of stories around technology or solutions to problems would be as part of a wider piece.
Yes.
So it would always be not about that product specifically, but if I was doing a piece on how you improve, do we need to improve air quality in care homes, whatever it might be, that you could bring that in as a case study. So if if there was a report, from an NHS organisation or the government, or there was some research that had been done that was kind of outside your organisation, but you could give me a reason to do this now.
Well, what's interesting, Emma,
that might help.
Yeah, what's interesting, Emma, is we have been working with the West of Scotland University. In fact, they're looking at implementing the system throughout the whole of the university based on the results, not just with regard to COVID, but also the elimination of CO2 up to 40%. Again, something which has gone beyond our wildest dreams. So the case studies are there. And also we've had specific feedback from the care home, where again, it's not just the relaxation of the fears of COVID, but also their neuro senses have went up, their cognitive abilities have changed. That has a massive effect on the mental health of the actual nurses and also the workers there, and they've noticed it. And we've given all this to journalists. We've given them case studies. We've given them feedback. In fact, we've been amazed at the feedback coming from it, but yet still that barrier. And that it's so frustrating, because what we don't obviously, yes, of course we want to sell our product, but we want to give people the knowledge and hope that there is hope out there. There is solutions out there.
Okay, Gerard, I'm afraid I'm going to have to pop you back onto mute because we've got a load of other questions to get through, but thank you. Right, I'm going to try and do a couple. We might overrun by, so we've had a question in about forward planning. So hi, I had a question about forward planning. How far in advance do you usually work, or does it completely depend on the publication / story?
Can I answer?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, it does depend, but I guess for me, because I mainly work on features that aren't, the bulk of my work are features that are not necessarily time tied. I'm normally working several weeks ahead. I kind of tend to plan each month kind of what I'm working on. But even then, for ideas, I might be working a month or two. It just depends. Like, if it's something for a magazine, then I'm like way in advance, like 3-4 months in advance. If it's, say it's feature from Metro, then it might be like a month in advance. But other things, I do stuff for Yahoo, it might be a quicker turnaround, it might be a week in advance. So it does depend, which again is why kind of building the relationship first can then help to sort of start to understand how an individual freelance operates, because we all operate very differently.
Awesome. Fine. I was going to say, I wonder if you've got a different opinion coming from a staff journalist background.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the event as well. If it's Christmas, which is obviously huge, we tend to start earlier. So it might be, I don't know, like October or wherever, where we sit down and we start thinking about feature ideas, and because they take a while to sort of plan and reach out to people and so on. But if it's like Pancake Day, we wouldn't start until like maybe a week or 2 weeks, maybe a week before. But also I would say that if we're coming up to Christmas, don't start pitching about Valentine's Day, because we do tend to take like one event at a time. So it just kind of depends on the event. We kind of take it one at a time, really.
Awesome. I'm going to jump to another question quickly, so to try and squeeze in a couple more. So there's been great advice for reaching out to freelancers, getting their attention, etc. Is that easily crossed over to staff journalists, or should PRs, comms professionals take a slightly different approach? So I'm going to go to Faima again, sorry for that one, as kind of the most recent staff journalist. Oh, hang on, you're on mute. Would it be a virtual event if somebody wasn't on mute?
Sorry. I was actually reading the comments and I missed the question. Would you mind just saying that again?
Yeah, so there's been great advice for reaching out to freelancers for getting their attention. Is that easily crossed over to staff journalists, or is there a slightly different approach that they should take? So for somebody approaching somebody on the Metro desk, for example.
I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. It's been pretty samey. I have not been freelancing for very long, but I think the methods of communication is pretty much the same, like email and DM, like on Twitter, pretty much. I don't know if that answers the question. Sorry.
Does anybody else have any kind of...
I think in some ways it can be less nuanced for staff, like certainly when we're doing shifts and stuff. Quite often people just want content, so that's where I suppose sending press releases can be useful. If you're on a news shift, you can kind of see what's going on, but they do need to be good press releases. That's the other thing that we haven't really touched on is we get quite a lot of not very good press releases, if I'm completely honest. And, you know, there needs to be a reason to kind of, you know, report on that particular subject or use it as a starting point for a bigger article. But yeah, I think it may, in some ways, for a news journalist, it's going to be more difficult to build up that relationship because they're just going through so many stories every day. I think it's more journalists that do more long form, perhaps like, you know, on features, more features content or analysis or investigations. That's where you're going to be able to build up more of a relationship with an individual.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think it's almost thinking about it as with freelancers, it is just the one track kind of exclusive kind of thing. Whereas I think with staff writers, I think it's almost a case of breaking it into 2 tracks and thinking with whatever story you're kind of wanting to push out, is this one which I'm just looking to get covered because it's a news press release and I'm just going to send that out everywhere, and having that as one track, or there might be, you know, that similar approach to a freelancer if you want to build a specific relationship. So it's almost to thinking about each individual story as, is this one that is just a news thing that I'm pushing out because lots of places will cover it, or is this something where I actually want to build a relationship with a staffer? So I think it's having a bit of a kind of multifaceted approach.
And I would say the benefit of working as a freelancer is that they will work with lots of different publications. So the likelihood is your client could end up in, you know, several different publications rather than just one, because we all kind of work for lots of different types of publications, and that might be print, might be web, you know, it might be websites, might be magazines, lots of different audiences. So you do have that benefit, but it's probably harder work building that relationship.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap up. We've still got 8 questions to answer. So what I'm going to suggest I do is I will send those questions around to our wonderful panel, and we will put together a blog post with answers to all of those. There's also been questions in the chat which I've grabbed and put in a notepad. So don't worry. I'm so sorry we've not been able to get to all the questions. I think kind of there was a lot more information than we could have probably gone on for another hour or so, but I can see numbers dwindling, so people need to get on with their day. But thank you so much to each and every one of you. It's been absolutely fantastic. The contributions that you've given and the insight, it's been so useful. Yeah, thank you to our wonderful panel. And thank you to everybody for joining us as well today. It's been fantastic, and such great interaction on the chat as well, which is always a really positive sign. So take care, everybody. Stay cool, stay safe, and take care.